The waves swallowed him whole that summer day, leaving nothing behind but a towel and a pair of sunglasses on the shore. Dylan Hayes, 19, vanished into the Pacific without a trace. No body was ever recovered. It was supposed to be a simple day at Crescent Bay, the kind of perfect California afternoon that writes itself into family photo albums. Instead, it wrote itself into police reports and missing persons databases. Search teams combed the waters for days. Helicopters circled overhead. Divers explored underwater caves. Nothing. Just the endless blue that had become his tomb, or so everyone thought. For Elaine Hayes, time stopped the moment the Coast Guard captain approached her, with that grim expression police officers perfect for delivering life-shattering news. "Ma'am, we've searched everything we can. The currents are strong here. Sometimes the ocean doesn't give back what it takes." Those words carved themselves into her mind, returning each night as she stared at the ceiling, sleepless and hollow. Dylan had been her only child, her miracle baby after years of trying. A boy with his father's smile and her stubbornness, who collected seashells until he was 14 and insisted they were treasures from another world. Who played guitar badly, but with such joy that no one had the heart to tell him. Who had just finished his freshman year at UC San Diego, studying marine biology because the ocean has all the best secrets, Mom. The ocean had taken him and kept its secret. The funeral was a formality. An empty casket lowered into the ground 3 weeks after the disappearance. Elaine had fought against it. "He's not dead, we haven't found him." But Robert, her husband, insisted they needed closure. "We have to accept it, Elaine. The statistics on ocean disappearances, they don't lie." Statistics. As if her son could be reduced to a percentage point on some Coast Guard chart. The mourners came with casseroles and platitudes. "He's with God now. At least he died doing what he loved. Time heals all wounds." Elaine nodded mechanically, thanked them for coming and retreated further into herself. Time didn't heal. It just stretched the wound into something you could carry around without screaming. Before Dylan disappeared, the Hayes family had been normal. Boringly so, Elaine sometimes thought. Robert worked as an architect for a mid-sized firm in San Diego. Elaine taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. They had barbecues on Sundays, complained about property taxes, and planned for Dylan's college graduation in a few years. They argued about small things like whether to remodel the kitchen or take that cruise to Alaska. After Dylan, they became that family, the one neighbors whispered about. So tragic. She's never been the same. I heard the husband sleeps in the guest room now. Tragedy made them interesting in the worst possible way. Robert threw himself into work, staying late at the office, taking on projects nobody wanted. Elaine took a leave of absence that turned permanent. She couldn't face 30 eager faces every morning, when all she could think about was the face she'd never see again. Their marriage became a shared haunting. 2 people orbiting a ghost, gravitationally bound by grief but unable to touch. When they spoke, it was about practical matters. Bills, groceries, whether the gutters needed cleaning. Never about Dylan. Never about the beach. Never about the dreams they both had where he walked through the front door, soaking wet but smiling. Elaine started a ritual that first year. Every morning, she walked to Crescent Bay at dawn, sat on the sand, and watched the waves. Sometimes she brought coffee. Sometimes she brought Dylan's favorite book, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and read passages aloud, letting the wind carry her words out to sea. She told herself she was keeping him company wherever he was. The ocean had become both his murderer and his monument. The locals got used to her. The sad beach lady who showed up rain or shine. Some brought her coffee occasionally. Others avoided eye contact. A few tried to engage her in conversation, but Elaine's responses were brief, polite dismissals. She wasn't there for connection. She was there for vigil. "It's not healthy," Robert told her during one of their infrequent dinners together. "Going there every day, it's like picking at a wound." "What would you know about wounds?" she'd snapped back. "You've buried yourself in blueprints." They'd stared at each other across the dining table, the distance between them measured in more than feet. The silence that followed was a well-rehearsed one. Robert eventually sighed, pushed his plate away and retreated to his home office. Elaine cleared the dishes and went to bed alone, as she had for the past 18 months. By the 3-year mark, Robert had moved out. "I'm not leaving you," he'd insisted as he packed his clothes. I need space to breathe." But they both knew it was more permanent than that. The divorce papers arrived 6 months later. Elaine signed them without argument. She kept the house. Robert didn't want it anyway. Too many memories haunting every corner. 4 years after Dylan vanished, Elaine joined a support group for parents of missing children. They met in a church basement on Wednesday evenings, sharing stories over bad coffee and store-bought cookies. Some of the cases were recent, raw wounds still bleeding. Others had been missing for decades, old scars that still ached. Elaine fell somewhere in between. She listened more than she spoke. Janice's daughter had disappeared walking home from school 20 years ago. Michael's son had gone to the store for milk and never returned 7 years back. Elena's twins had been taken by their father during what was supposed to be a weekend visit. When Elaine finally shared her story, the words came out mechanical and rehearsed. My son Dylan was 19. He disappeared while swimming at Crescent Bay. They never found his body. It's been 4 years, 3 months and 12 days. What she didn't tell them, how she still kept his room exactly as he'd left it, how she still bought his favorite cereal sometimes, only to throw it out weeks later, untouched. How she'd become obsessed with marine biology, reading textbooks and scientific journals, trying to understand the world that had claimed him. How sometimes in dreams she could swear Dylan was still alive somewhere, trying to reach her. "Does it get easier?" she asked Janice once after a particularly difficult meeting. The older woman's smile was gentle but hollow. "No, it gets different. The pain changes shape. Some days it's a boulder crushing you. Other days it's just a stone in your shoe. But it never leaves." Irritade demise. Time kept moving, dragging Elaine along with it. 5 years, 6, 7. The world changed around her. Smartphones became ubiquitous. Social media exploded. Streaming services replaced cable TV. Presidents came and went. Wars started and ended. Through it all, Elaine remained suspended in amber, preserving the moment before Dylan disappeared. His bedroom remained a shrine. His high school textbooks still lined the shelves. His posters, faded now, still clung to the walls. She tried dating once at the insistence of her sister Maggie. "You're only 46, Elaine. You still have a life to live." The man was kind enough, a divorced history teacher with grown children of his own. They went to dinner, talked about books. He didn't press when she declined a second date. "I'm not ready," she told Maggie afterward. The truth was more complicated. She felt she was betraying Dylan by trying to be happy. At the 8-year mark, Elaine sold the house. It had become too large, too empty, too haunted. She moved to a small apartment closer to the beach. Dylan's things, the ones she couldn't bear to part with, came with her, packed carefully into labeled boxes. His guitar, his collection of seashells, the acceptance letter from UC San Diego that she'd had framed. The rest went into a storage unit she visited on his birthday each year. Her morning ritual continued. Dawn at the beach, watching the waves, talking to a ghost. But something had shifted subtly. The crushing weight had indeed become a stone, still present but manageable. She started volunteering at the local library twice a week, joined a book club, reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during her darkest years. And then came the dreams. They started roughly 9 years after Dylan's disappearance. Vivid, unsettling dreams where he wasn't dead but hiding. In these dreams, Dylan would look at her with his father's eyes and say, "I had to go, Mom, please understand." She'd wake gasping, heart pounding, sheets soaked with sweat. The dreams came with increasing frequency. Sometimes Dylan was on a boat, sometimes in a foreign city with signs in languages she couldn't read. Sometimes he was with a woman Elaine didn't recognize. Always he seemed both apologetic and determined. "I couldn't stay. I had to go." Elaine mentioned the dreams to her therapist. She'd finally started seeing one in year 6 at Maggie's relentless urging. "The mind processes grief in strange ways," Dr. Patterson explained. "These dreams could be your subconscious trying to find meaning in a senseless loss." "But they feel so real," Elaine insisted. "It's like he's trying to tell me something." Dr. Patterson's smile was practiced, professional. "The people we lose never really leave us. They live on in our memories, our dreams. But sometimes we need to be careful about the stories we tell ourselves. Dreams can be comforting, but they can also prevent us from accepting reality, as if anything had felt real since that day at Crescent Bay. The dreams triggered something in Elaine, a restlessness she hadn't felt in years. She found herself revisiting the police reports, the search documentation, eyewitness accounts. She created a timeline on her living room wall, connecting events with red string, like she'd seen detectives do in crime shows. There were inconsistencies she hadn't noticed before, or perhaps hadn't wanted to see. Dylan's wallet had been found in his car, but his phone had never been recovered. His backpack was missing too. One witness reported seeing someone matching his description walking toward the parking lot around the time he supposedly drowned, but the police had dismissed it as a mistaken identity. "You're looking for patterns that aren't there," Robert told her when she called him with her theories. They spoke occasionally now, the sharp edges of their grief dulled enough to allow brief conversations. He had remarried, a kindergarten teacher named Carol, and moved to Phoenix. "Maybe," Elaine conceded, "or maybe I'm finally seeing clearly." The 10th anniversary of Dylan's disappearance arrived with the usual media attention. Local news did a small segment, remembering Dylan Hayes 10 years later. They interviewed the Coast Guard captain who had led the search, now retired, showed footage of the memorial bench Elaine had installed at Crescent Bay in Year 5, asked expert opinions on rip currents and ocean safety. Elaine declined to be interviewed. Instead, she sat on that bench and watched the ocean, as she had done nearly every day for a decade. The reporters kept their distance, filming her from afar, the grieving mother, still faithful to her vigil. They didn't approach. Perhaps they sensed that her grief was not for public consumption. That evening, Elaine did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She opened a bottle of Dylan's favorite wine, he had just been old enough to drink legally, and scrolled through old photos on her laptop. Dylan as a toddler, chasing seagulls on this very beach. Dylan at 10, proudly holding up a science fair trophy. Dylan at 16, awkward in a tuxedo before prom. Dylan at 19, bright-eyed and laughing during freshman orientation. The last photo she had of him, taken just 2 weeks before he disappeared. The wine loosened something in her. On impulse, she opened Instagram, an app she barely used. Her profile was sparse, a few photos of the ocean, quotes about grief, the occasional sunset. She had created the account years ago at Maggie's insistence, but rarely posted. Tonight, feeling melancholy and a bit reckless, she decided to search Dylan's name. Dylan Hayes was a common enough name. Dozens of profiles appeared. Young men with her son's name living their lives across the world, playing sports, graduating college, getting married, living the future her Dylan would never have. She scrolled idly, another form of self-torture. Then her finger froze. A profile caught her eye. Ocean Dweller Dylan. The profile picture was blurry, taken from a distance. A man on a boat, face turned partly away from the camera. But something about the set of the shoulders, the angle of the jaw. Elaine's hands shook as she tapped on the profile. Private, not accepting followers. Only 5 posts visible to the public. Her heart pounding, she examined each one. A sunset over water. A beach she didn't recognize with palm trees and white sand. The deck of a sailboat. A quote about finding freedom in isolation. And the most recent post, dated just 3 months ago. A close-up of a seashell that made Elaine's blood freeze in her veins. It was a lightning whelk, uncommon, distinctive spiral pattern, a small chip on the outer lip, identical to one missing from Dylan's collection. His prized find from a family trip to the Gulf Coast when he was 12. Elaine stared at the image until her eyes burned. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Coincidence. Wishful thinking. Grief playing tricks on her mind. She took a screenshot and sent it to Maggie with a brief message. "Am I crazy?" Maggie called immediately. "What am I looking at, Elaine?" "Dylan's shell. The one from Galveston. The special one." A pause. "Sweetie, shells can look similar. This could be any lightning whelk. With the exact same chip? Look at the right side of the opening." Another pause, longer this time. "I don't know what to say. I think—" Elaine's voice broke. "I think he might be alive." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with concern. When Maggie spoke again, her tone was gentle, the kind reserved for fragile things. "Elaine, we've been through this before. Remember the sighting in Seattle 3 years ago? And the postcard you were sure he sent? I'm worried about you." "This is different," Elaine insisted. "This is his shell. Even if it is, and that's a big if, it could have been sold, given away, lost at the beach. There are 100 explanations that don't involve—" Maggie couldn't finish the sentence. "That don't involve my son being alive?" Elaine's voice hardened. That don't involve him abandoning his family and faking his death. Yes, Maggie said softly. Because that would mean he let you suffer for 10 years, Elaine. Would Dylan do that to you? Would he? The Dylan she knew, the boy she raised? No, never. He was kind, thoughtful, sometimes too sensitive for his own good. But people change. 19 is young enough to make terrible decisions, young enough to want escape at any cost. I need to know, Elaine said finally, even if it breaks my heart all over again. The next morning, Elaine skipped her beach vigil for the first time in years. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table with a notepad, making lists. She needed to be methodical, to approach this like the investigation it was, not the desperate reaching of a grieving mother. First, she documented everything she knew about the Instagram account, created approximately 2 years ago, 5 public posts, location tagged on one post as somewhere in the Caribbean. The username, Ocean Dweller Dylan, could be a coincidence but combined with the shell. Next, she listed Dylan's known interests, skills and connections before his disappearance. He'd been a strong swimmer. Ironic, given his supposed drowning. He'd worked summer jobs as a sailing instructor at the local yacht club. His roommate at college had family in the Caribbean. He'd talked about taking a gap year to travel, though he'd ultimately decided to start college right after high school. Finally, she wrote down the inconsistencies in the official account of his disappearance. The missing phone and backpack. The witness who might have seen him walking to the parking lot. The fact that none of his personal items had washed ashore despite the predicted current patterns. Staring at her notes, Elaine felt simultaneously foolish and vindicated. Written out like this, it seemed both plausible and insane. Her son faking his own death at 19, living secretly for a decade. It was the plot of a bad thriller, not real life. Yet the shell haunted her. That particular lightning whelk had been Dylan's treasure. He'd spent hours finding it, had carried it wrapped in a t-shirt all the way home from Texas, had displayed it prominently in his collection. If someone else had it now, how? The collection had been packed away after his disappearance, stored first in his untouched room and later in her apartment. Elaine checked the boxes in her storage closet. The seashell collection was intact, except for the lightning whelk. She hadn't noticed it missing before, but then she rarely opened these boxes. The pain was too acute. When had it disappeared? Had it been missing all along? Had someone taken it recently? Or had Dylan himself retrieved it somehow? The questions multiplied, branching like lightning across a storm-dark sky. Elaine felt simultaneously energized and exhausted. For years she had lived in the certainty of loss. Now uncertainty crackled around her like static electricity, painful but alive with possibility. She tried following the Instagram account. Her request hung pending. She considered creating a fake account to try again, but something stopped her. If it really was Dylan, a possibility that still seemed more fantasy than reality, wouldn't he recognize her? Wouldn't he block her immediately? Unless he wanted to be found. The public posts, the shell that only she would recognize. What if they were breadcrumbs? What if, after all these years, he was reaching out in the only way he could? Elaine's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at her door. It was Sandra from the apartment next door holding a small package. "This came for you yesterday," Sandra explained. "The delivery guy left it with me when you didn't answer." Elaine thanked her and closed the door, examining the package. Small, lightweight, no return address. Her name and address printed on a label, not handwritten. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a simple white card with a quote printed in elegant script. The sea always filled her with longing, though for what she was never sure. Below it, handwritten, Crescent Cove, North Point, sunrise on the 15th. The card trembled in Elaine's hands. Today was the 13th, 2 days from now. She turned the card over. Nothing. Checked the package again. Empty except for some packing material. No signature, no explanation. Could it be? After all this time? Or was it cruel joke? She had been in the news recently with the 10-year anniversary. Someone could have seen the stories, could be playing an elaborate, heartless prank. Or worse, could it be dangerous? A trap set by someone who had seen a vulnerable woman on television? Elaine sat heavily on her couch, the card still in her hands. Should she call the police? What would she tell them? That she suspected her long-dead son had sent her a cryptic invitation? That she'd found an Instagram account she thought might be his? They would look at her with that same pitying expression she'd grown to hate over the years. Should she tell Maggie? Her sister would insist on coming with her. Or worse, try to talk her out of going altogether. No, whatever this was, closure or opening, ending or beginning, she needed to face it alone. The next 48 hours passed with excruciating slowness. Elaine went through the motions of her life, volunteering at the library, attending her book club, even making her morning pilgrimage to the beach. But her mind was elsewhere, caught between wild hope and protective skepticism. She told no one about the card or her plan to go to North Point. North Point was the furthest edge of Crescent Bay, rocky and isolated. Few people ventured there, especially at sunrise. If someone wanted privacy for a meeting, it was an ideal location. If someone wanted to harm her, it was equally ideal. Elaine wasn't naive. She took precautions. She wrote a note explaining where she was going and why, sealed it in an envelope, and left it on her kitchen table. She told Sandra she was meeting an old friend for breakfast, so someone would miss her if she didn't return. She charged her phone fully and downloaded an emergency alert app. The night before the meeting, Elaine barely slept. She watched the hours tick by on her bedside clock, rehearsing what she would say if it really was Dylan. A decade of questions, accusations, and longing distilled into an opening line. Nothing seemed adequate. What do you say to a ghost who turns out to be flesh and blood? What do you say to a son who let you mourn him while he lived? What do you say to a young man who is now almost 30, whose entire adult life has been a mystery to you? As the first grey light of dawn crept through her window, Elaine rose and dressed carefully. Jeans, walking shoes, a warm jacket against the morning chill, hair brushed but not fussed over, a touch of lipstick, a maternal vanity she couldn't quite suppress. She wanted to look like herself, only steadier than she felt. The drive to Crescent Bay was familiar. She made it daily, but turning toward North Point instead of her usual spot felt strange, almost transgressive. The parking lot was empty at this hour. Elaine left her car and began the walk along the shoreline toward the rocky outcropping that marked North Point. The tide was coming in, waves lapping higher on the sand with each passing minute. The sky was lightening from charcoal to pearl grey, the first hint of sun still below the horizon. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries plaintive in the morning stillness. As Elaine approached North Point, her steps slowed. Fear and anticipation wrestled within her. Around the bend of rock someone might be waiting. Dylan? A cruel prankster? No one at all. She paused, gathering her courage, then rounded the bend. A figure stood at the water's edge, back turned to her. Male, tall, dark hair ruffled by the breeze. Elaine's heart stuttered. Too far to see clearly, too far to be sure. But something in the stance, the way he held his shoulders. Dylan? Her voice was barely a whisper, lost in the sound of waves. She moved closer, legs unsteady beneath her. Dylan? Louder this time. The figure turned. Time collapsed. 10 years evaporated between one heartbeat and the next. The face was older, a man's face now, not a boy's. Leaner, more angular, a scar near the right eyebrow that hadn't been there before. But the eyes, Robert's eyes, were unmistakable. Dylan. Her son, alive. Mom. His voice deeper than she remembered. Rough with emotion or disuse, she couldn't tell. Elaine swayed on her feet. The world tilted dangerously. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her. "I've got you," Dylan said. "Sit down before you fall." He helped her to a nearby rock. Elaine stared at him, drinking in every detail. The beard, neat, close-trimmed. The tan that spoke of years in the sun. The calluses on his hands. Alive. Real. Here. How? The only word she could manage passed the knot in her throat. Dylan knelt before her, still holding her hands. His eyes, so familiar, yet somehow belonging to a stranger, searched her face with equal hunger. "It's complicated," he began. "I never meant for it to last this long. I never meant to hurt you like this." A laugh escaped her, sharp and bitter. "Hurt me, Dylan. I buried you. An empty casket, but still, I buried my son." He flinched. Good. Let him feel a fraction of her pain. "I'm sorry." The words were inadequate, and he knew it. "I was 19 and stupid and trapped. I thought I had no other choice. No choice but to let your family think you were dead for 10 years. Anger flared, bright and clarifying. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Your father and I divorced. I lost my job, my friends. I've spent a decade coming to this beach every morning to talk to a ghost. Shame darkened his expression. I know. I've seen you. The words hit her like a slap. You've been here? Watching me? Not often. A few times over the years. From a distance. You watched me mourn you and did nothing. The betrayal was breathtaking in its scope. How could you be so cruel? I wanted to reach out before, Dylan said, but it got harder the longer I waited. How do you tell someone you've been alive after they've grieved you for years? After 2 years, 5, 8, the right moment never came. The right moment was before I thought the ocean had taken you. Elaine's voice rose, echoing off the rocks. The right moment was before the search parties and the funeral and the years of therapy. Dylan dropped his head. You're right. There's no excuse. His contrition did nothing to dull her anger. Questions tumbled out of her, sharp-edged and relentless. Why? Why did you do it? Where have you been? Who have you been? Dylan sighed deeply. It started with money. I owed people, dangerous people. I got involved with the wrong crowd at school, started running packages for them. I didn't know what was in them at first, or at least I pretended not to know. When I figured it out, I tried to quit. They threatened me. Then they threatened you and Dad. Elaine stared at him in disbelief. Drugs? You faked your death because of a drug debt. It sounds stupid now, he admitted, but I was terrified. These weren't college kids selling weed. These were serious people with serious connections. When I tried to back out, they broke into my apartment, beat my roommate, left messages about how they knew where my parents lived. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Elaine's chest ache. I panicked. I thought if I disappeared, if everyone thought I was dead, they'd leave you alone. It was the only solution my 19-year-old brain could come up with. So you, what? Walked into the ocean, left your things on the beach, and then what? I had it all planned. I swam around the point to where Marcus was waiting with a car. You remember Marcus? My sailing instructor from the yacht club? He helped me get to Mexico. I worked on boats there for a while, then the Caribbean. I've been island hopping for years, working on charters, living under different names. The practicality of it all, the calculation, stunned Elaine. All this time you've been sailing around the Caribbean while I thought you were dead? Not exactly paradise, Dylan said quietly. I've been looking over my shoulder for a decade, never staying in one place too long, never making real connections. It's been lonely. Lonely? Elaine couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Try sitting at your child's funeral, Dylan. Try explaining to well-meaning people year after year that, no, you're not moving on, because how do you move on from losing your only child? Try marking 10 birthdays of someone you'll never see grow older. That's lonely. Tears filled his eyes. I know. I know it was selfish and stupid and unforgivable. I've played out this conversation in my head 1,000 times over the years. In none of those versions did I have any right to ask for your forgiveness. Then why now? Why reach out after all this time? Dylan took a deep breath. Because it's over. The people I was running from, they're gone. Most of them are in prison now after a big DEA operation last year. The rest have bigger concerns than a small-time runner who disappeared a decade ago. So what? You thought you'd just waltz back into my life? Into a world where Dylan Hayes is legally dead? No. He shook his head firmly. I'm not asking to come home or reclaim my old life that Dylan is dead. I've been Matthew Sanders for the past 8 years. I have ID, work history, a life. Then what do you want from me? Elaine asked, suddenly exhausted. I wanted you to know the truth, that I didn't die, that the ocean didn't take me, that your morning vigils weren't in vain. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, offering it to her. And I wanted to return this. The lightning whelk shell sat in his palm. The one from his Instagram. The one from Galveston. I took it the day I left, he explained. It was the only thing of home I allowed myself. I know now it was wrong, posting it where you might see it. But after 10 years, I think I wanted to be found. Elaine stared at the shell but made no move to take it. The Instagram account. Was that deliberate? A way to reach out? Dylan nodded slowly. Part of me hoped you'd somehow find it. Another part was terrified you would. When you tried to follow the account last week, I knew it was time. And the note? The meeting? I've been watching the news, the 10-year anniversary coverage. Seeing you on that bench, he swallowed hard. I couldn't let you spend another decade not knowing. The sun had fully risen now, painting the sky in pastels. Light caught in the water droplets on the rocks around them, creating tiny rainbows. Beautiful and terrible, like this moment. What happens now? Elaine asked. The question encompassed universes. That's up to you, Dylan said. I'm staying in a hotel in San Diego for a few days. After that, I have a charter job taking a family from Florida to the Bahamas. My life is there now. Your life, Elaine repeated. The words tasted strange. A life I know nothing about. You could know it, he offered hesitantly, if you wanted to. Not right away. But letters, calls, maybe visits someday. Elaine laughed, a sound with no humor in it. You're asking me to keep your secret, to know you're alive but pretend to the world and to your father that you're still dead. I'm asking for a chance, Dylan corrected, to explain everything properly, to tell you about the last 10 years, to maybe someday earn back a fraction of your trust. Trust, as if such a thing could exist between them now. Elaine stood abruptly. I need to go. Panic flashed across Dylan's face. Mom, please, no. She held up a hand to stop him. I can't do this right now. I can't process this. It's too much. Will you tell anyone? Fear edged his voice. The question sparked fresh anger. Still worried about yourself? Still running? Not for me, he insisted. For you. If people knew, if it got out that I faked my death, there could be legal implications. Insurance fraud. The costs of the search operations. I don't want you caught in that. Always a new complication. Always a new reason for secrecy. Elaine felt suddenly bone-tired. I don't know what I'm going to do. I need time. Dylan nodded, accepting this. He reached into his pocket again and withdrew a small card. My number and an email address. Secure. If you're ready to talk again. Elaine took the card mechanically, not looking at it before sliding it into her jacket pocket. Goodbye, Dylan. Or Matthew. Or whoever you are now. She turned to leave, then paused. The shell. Keep it. I buried my son with his collection intact. Let Matthew Sanders have this one piece of whoever he was before. Without waiting for his response, Elaine walked away, following the curve of the shoreline back toward her car. She didn't look back. Couldn't bear to see if he was watching her go or if he had already disappeared again. The world looked different somehow. The same beach she had visited daily for a decade now seemed alien territory. The same sun that had risen over her grief thousands of times now illuminated a landscape she didn't recognize. Her son was alive. The truth she had secretly hoped for in her darkest moments was now reality, and it was more painful than the lie had been. Elaine drove home in a daze, moving on autopilot. Inside her apartment, she removed the note she'd left on the kitchen table and tore it to pieces. Then she sat on her couch, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of the impossible. Dylan was alive, had been alive all this time, had watched her grieve and said nothing, had built a new life while she remained trapped in the amber of his supposed death. She should feel joy, relief, gratitude. Instead, she felt hollowed out, betrayed in a way so fundamental it defied categorization. What now? Tell Robert, the police, her support group, keep the secret, and carry yet another burden. The questions multiplied until her head throbbed with them. Elaine reached for her phone, nearly called Maggie, then stopped. What would she say? How could she possibly explain? Instead, she opened Instagram again, searched for Ocean Dweller Dylan. The account was still there, still private. But now, knowing the truth behind it, each image took on new meaning. The boat that had been his home, the beaches where he had built a new life while she remained frozen in grief, the shell that had been both message and confession. Elaine's finger hovered over the request to follow button she had pressed days earlier. Her request still showed as pending. Would he accept it now? Give her a window into the life he had built from the ashes of his old one? Did she even want to see it? She closed the app without deciding. There would be time for that later. Right now, she needed to process the earthquake that had just leveled her world for the second time in a decade. The card with Dylan's, no Matthew's, contact information sat on her coffee table where she had tossed it. Elaine stared at it without touching it, as if it might burn her fingers. Such a small thing to contain such enormous implications. Hours passed. The sun tracked across the sky outside her windows. Elaine remained on her couch, paralyzed by the magnitude of the morning's revelation. Her phone rang several times. The library where she was supposed to volunteer that afternoon. her book club coordinator confirming tomorrow's meeting, Maggie checking in as she did every few days. Elaine let them all go to voicemail. How many lies would she have to tell now? How many half-truths and omissions? If she kept Dylan's secret, and she had not yet decided if she would become complicit in his deception. Each conversation with Robert about their son would be tainted. Each support group meeting where she shared her ongoing grief would be fraudulent. Yet the alternative seemed equally impossible. To expose Dylan would be to destroy Matthew Sanders, to subject him to legal consequences she couldn't even fully comprehend, to drag his resurrection through media circus and courtroom drama. Could she do that to him, no matter how much his deception had hurt her? And beneath these practical concerns lurked a deeper, more selfish question. If the world knew Dylan was alive, what would that make her? No longer the tragic, grieving mother who had shown such devotion. Just a fool. A woman so blind she couldn't see her own son had chosen to abandon her. Night fell. Elaine finally rose from the couch, moving stiffly after sitting for so long. She made herself a sandwich she couldn't taste, and a cup of tea that grew cold on the counter. Her mind circled the same questions without finding answers. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and haunted. In her dreams, Dylan drowned over and over, reaching for her from beneath dark waves. In other dreams, he walked away down endless beaches, never looking back no matter how loudly she called his name. She woke at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat and tangled in sheets. Dawn found her at Crescent Bay, not at North Point where they had met, but at her usual spot, the place where she had maintained her decade-long vigil. The familiar ritual now felt like play acting. The waves that had supposedly claimed her son now seemed to mock her with their secrets. "You never had him," they seemed to say with each crash against the shore. "He left you by choice." For the first time in 10 years, Elaine didn't stay to watch the full sunrise. She turned her back on the ocean and walked away. 3 days passed in this limbo. Elaine went through the motions of her life, rescheduled her library shift, attended her book club with nothing to contribute, assured Maggie she was just fighting a mild cold. All while the card with Matthew Sanders' contact information sat untouched on her coffee table. On the 4th day, Elaine woke with sudden clarity. She couldn't continue in this suspension between past and future. She needed answers, real ones, not the rushed explanations of a 30-minute meeting on a beach. Whatever came after, she needed to understand. She picked up the card, dialed the number. It rang 3 times before he answered. "Hello?" The caution in his voice was palpable. "It's me," Elaine said simply. "I'm ready to talk." Really talk. The relief in his exhale was audible. "Where? When?" "Not in public. Come to my apartment." She gave him the address. "Tonight at 7. I'll be there," he promised. Then, tentatively, "Thank you." Elaine hung up without responding to that. What was she supposed to say? "You're welcome for not turning you in. You're welcome for considering hearing out your explanation for a decade of lies." The hours until 7 crawled by. Elaine cleaned her apartment obsessively, then realized she was preparing for a guest, not a ghost. She put away the framed photos of Dylan that still occupied her shelves, took down the small memorial shadow box that held his high school tassel and honor society pin, hid the scrapbooks and albums. She couldn't bear to have him see the physical manifestations of her grief, displayed like museum exhibits of a history that had never truly existed. At 6:50, the buzzer rang. Elaine's heart jumped to her throat. He was early. Of course he was early. Dylan had always been punctual to a fault, a trait inherited from Robert. Some things apparently didn't change even when everything else did. She buzzed him in and waited by the open door, listening to footsteps climbing the stairs to her 3rd-floor apartment. And then he was there, standing in her hallway, more real somehow than he had been on the beach, less ghost, more flesh. Dylan, Matthew, looked different in regular clothes, jeans, a simple button-down shirt, a light jacket. His hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed even closer than before. He looked like any other young professional in San Diego. Unremarkable, invisible. He carried a small duffel bag over one shoulder and a paper shopping bag in his hand. Both looked incongruously mundane given the circumstances. "Hi," he said, his voice soft, almost timid. "Thank you for seeing me." Elaine stepped back to let him enter, maintaining careful distance. "Come in," Her apartment felt smaller with him in it. He seemed too large, too solid, too alive for a space that had been decorated around his absence. He stood awkwardly in the center of the living room, clearly noting the conspicuous gaps on her shelves where his photos had been. "You can sit," Elaine said, gesturing to the couch. She took the armchair opposite, keeping the coffee table between them. A buffer against... what? She wasn't sure. Emotion. Deception. The overwhelming strangeness of hosting her dead son for evening conversation? Dylan sat, placing the duffel beside his feet and the paper bag on the coffee table. "I brought these," he said, nodding toward the bag. "I thought they might help explain, or at least give you context." Elaine made no move to examine the bag's contents. "Before we get to that, I need to know something. Did your father know? Was he part of this?" The question clearly startled him. "Dad? No." "God, no, he had no idea. Has no idea." Relief and renewed grief washed through her simultaneously. At least she hadn't been the only fool. At least Robert hadn't been party to this elaborate deception. But that also meant he was still living with the pain she now had the mixed blessing of seeing alleviated. "Good," she said. "That's good. Have you told him?" Dylan asked carefully. "Or anyone?" Elaine's laugh was short and bitter. "Told them what? That my dead son isn't dead after all. That he's been sailing around the Caribbean for a decade while I've been talking to an empty ocean? No, Dylan. Or Matthew. Or whatever I'm supposed to call you. I haven't told anyone." He flinched at her tone. "You can call me Dylan. That's who I am with you. Is it? Because I'm not sure I know who you are at all anymore." The silence that followed was heavy with all the years between them. Finally, Dylan reached for the paper bag on the table. "Maybe this will help?" He withdrew a leather-bound journal and handed it to her. "I've kept this since I left. Not every day, but a lot of days. It might answer some of your questions." Elaine took the journal warily, holding it like it might contain something volatile. In a way, it did. "You expect me to read this now?" "No," he said quickly. "Whenever you're ready. If you're ever ready, I want you to have it. To know what the years were like for me, too. And this?" She nodded toward the duffel bag at his feet. "Papers, my new identity. Photos of where I've lived, boats I've worked on, people I've known." He hesitated. "And something else. Something I'm not proud of, but you should know about." Elaine set the journal on the table, suddenly weary. "Just tell me, Dylan. I'm tired of secrets." He nodded, reaching into the duffel to withdraw a manila envelope. "The first few years, I was just surviving, moving from place to place, working under the table on boats, staying ahead of the people I thought were after me." He opened the envelope. "Then I met someone, Sophia. She helped me become Matthew." He passed Elaine a photograph. A dark-haired woman with an easy smile standing on the deck of a sailboat. Beautiful in an understated way. She knew someone who could create new identity documents, clean ones that would pass scrutiny. It wasn't cheap, but by then I'd saved enough from working charters. Dylan paused. "We were together for 3 years. You had a relationship." Elaine stared at the photo. "While I was grieving my son, he was falling in love. It wasn't that simple," Dylan said softly. "I was broken, Mom, afraid all the time. Guilty. Sophia knew I was running from something, though I never told her the full truth. She thought I was escaping an abusive family, not this. What happened to her? She wanted more than I could give her. A real life, marriage, eventually children. But Matthew Sanders had no past, no family, no roots, and I couldn't bring myself to build a future on a foundation of lies." He took back the photograph, looking at it with evident regret. "She left 2 years ago, married someone else last year." Elaine absorbed this information silently. Her son had loved and lost, had considered marriage, perhaps fatherhood. Entire chapters of his life had been written without her knowledge. "There's more," Dylan continued, pulling out another photo. This one showed him with a young boy, maybe 7 or 8, both grinning on a beach. Sophia's nephew, Lucas. He was 4 when I met him. For a while I was the closest thing he had to a father figure. His dad wasn't in the picture. The pain in his voice was raw, genuine. When Sophia left, I lost him too. That hurt the most." Elaine studied the photo. The boy had his aunt's dark hair and smile. Dylan looked happier than she had seen him in either of their recent encounters. More at ease, more himself. "So you built a life," she said. "A real one. With people you cared about." "Yes," he admitted, "and lost it. Maybe that was my punishment." Elaine handed back the photo. I don't believe in that kind of cosmic justice. No? He looked surprised. The religious instruction of my childhood suggested otherwise. Your childhood was a long time ago. People change, even mothers. Especially mothers who spend a decade grieving children who aren't dead. Dylan nodded, accepting this. What else do you want to know? Everything. Nothing. The questions that had seemed so urgent days ago now felt almost irrelevant in the face of these glimpses into his parallel life. Are you happy? The question surprised them both. Dylan considered it carefully. Not exactly. Content sometimes. At peace with my choices less often. The sailing life suits me. I've always loved the ocean. The irony of that isn't lost on me. He gestured toward the journal. It's all in there. The good days and the very bad ones. And now, coming back here, seeing me. Is that making you happy? Terrified, he corrected. Relieved. Ashamed. Happy isn't the word I'd use. Honesty, at least. Elaine could recognize that much. What about you, Mom? He asked quietly. Before all this, before I reappeared, were you happy? The question struck her as both naive and profound. I was surviving, finding ways to live with grief, building routines. I have friends, book club, my volunteer work. She paused. It's not the life I thought I'd have, but it's mine. Dylan nodded, understanding. Then he reached into the duffel one last time and removed a thick envelope. This is the last thing. The thing I'm not proud of. Elaine took it cautiously. Inside was a stack of newspaper clippings, printouts of online articles, photographs taken from a distance. She recognized herself in many of them. Standing on the beach, sitting on Dylan's memorial bench, at the 5-year remembrance ceremony, the 10-year media coverage. You kept track of me, she said, the realization dawning. All this time? Yes. His voice was barely audible. I told myself it was to make sure you were okay, that you were healing, but really, I think it was selfishness. A way to still be connected to you without taking responsibility for what I'd done. Elaine leafed through the collection. Years of her life, her grief, documented and catalogued by the very person who had caused it. The invasion of privacy should have angered her, but instead she felt a strange sense of connection. While she had been talking to the ocean, imagining her words reaching wherever Dylan was, he had been watching from afar, a twisted echo of her own vigil. There's something else you should know, Dylan said after she had examined the contents of the envelope. Something that happened about 5 years ago. Elaine looked up, bracing herself for another revelation. I almost came back then, he admitted. I saw an article about the 5-year memorial service. You looked so thin, so exhausted. I couldn't bear it anymore. I got as far as LAX, had a ticket to San Diego. What stopped you? Fear. Cowardice. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture again. And then at the airport I saw Dad, with a woman I didn't recognize. They were checking in for a flight to Phoenix. Carol, Elaine supplied, his wife now. They looked happy, Dylan continued. He was laughing, moving on. I realized that coming back would destroy that for him, would force him to relive everything. I couldn't do it. So you chose to let me continue suffering alone instead. The words hung between them, undeniable in their truth. Yes, Dylan acknowledged. I made the wrong choice. Again, I've made so many wrong choices, Mom. Elaine studied her son, this adult stranger, with her boy's eyes. Why now, then? What changed after 10 years that didn't change after 5? I saw you on the news again, at the 10-year memorial. You said something that hit me like a physical blow. He closed his eyes, reciting from memory. Part of me will always wonder if he's out there somewhere, if the ocean didn't take him but just carried him to another shore. Elaine remembered saying those words to a reporter. They had been edited into a segment about families of drowning victims who never recover bodies. She hadn't thought much about them at the time, just another soundbite in a decade of talking about her loss. You were right, Dylan said, opening his eyes. The ocean didn't take me. It did carry me to another shore, and I couldn't let you spend another 10 years wondering, not when I could give you the truth, whatever the cost. The irony was almost too much to bear. Her offhand comment, meant as poetic description of her enduring grief, had been accidentally prophetic, and had finally breached the walls of her son's self-imposed exile. What do you want from me now, Dylan? Elaine asked, the weariness returning. Forgiveness? Permission to disappear again? What? He shook his head. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What I want, he hesitated, What I hope for is a chance to know you again, somehow, on whatever terms you can accept. And if I can't accept any terms, if this, she gestured between them, is too broken to fix, Dylan's expression was solemn, then I'll respect that. I'll go back to my life, and you can decide what to do with the truth. Tell Dad or don't. Tell the world or don't. I'm done running from consequences. The finality in his voice gave Elaine pause. There was a maturity there that the boy who had fled into the ocean had lacked. Perhaps these 10 years had changed him more than she had initially allowed herself to see. I need time, she said finally. Time to read this. She tapped the journal. Time to process all of this. I can't give you an answer tonight. I understand. He hesitated. My flight back to Florida is in 3 days. I'm staying at the Harbor Inn downtown, room 214, if you want to reach me before then. After that, he pulled out his phone. Can I have your number? Just to have a way to contact you? Elaine considered refusing, then relented. She recited her number, watching as he programmed it into his phone under Mom. The simple label made her throat tighten unexpectedly. Dylan stood, gathering his duffel but leaving the paper bag with the journal, photos and clippings on the table. Thank you for seeing me, for listening. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that not a day went by when I didn't think of you, when I didn't regret what I put you through. Elaine remained seated. I need to ask you something else, something important. Anything, he said, turning back. These dangerous people you were running from, you're sure they're gone? That they're not still a threat to you? Or to me? Dylan's expression was grave. As sure as I can be. The organization was dismantled by federal agents. The leaders are serving long sentences. It's been over for years. Then why didn't you come back years ago, when it was safe? He had no immediate answer, his gaze dropping to the floor. Because the longer I waited, the harder it became. Because I convinced myself you were better off with a dead son than a lying one. Because I was a coward. At least he wasn't hiding behind excuses anymore. That was something. Goodbye, Dylan, Elaine said quietly. I'll be in touch before you leave, one way or another. He nodded, accepting her terms. Goodbye, Mom. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow conveyed more finality than a slam would have. Elaine sat motionless for a long time, staring at the paper bag and its contents, the tangible evidence of a life she hadn't known existed. Eventually, she reached for the journal. The leather was worn soft with handling, the pages slightly rippled from humidity, the record of a life spent near the sea. She opened it to the first entry, dated 2 weeks after Dylan's death. I've been dead for 14 days now, it began. Mom thinks I drowned. Dad thinks I drowned. Everyone thinks the ocean took me. Only Marcus knows the truth. We're in Ensenada now. I'm using the name Daniel. I look at the water and wonder if this is what drowning feels like after all. Being alive but unable to breathe normally. To live normally. I miss Mom. I've made a terrible mistake, but it's too late to undo it. I have to keep going now. Elaine closed the journal, unable to read more just yet. The raw pain in those first words was too much, both a validation of her own suffering and a window into his. The boy who had fled into a false death had been suffering too. Not like she had, perhaps, but suffering nonetheless. She placed the journal on her nightstand, a commitment to read it eventually. Tomorrow, perhaps. Or the next day, when she felt strong enough to witness her son's parallel journey through the same decade that had nearly broken her. For now, she needed sleep. Needed to process the seismic revelations of the day, needed to decide what kind of relationship, if any, she could build with this man who was both her son and a stranger. Elaine slept fitfully again that night, but the dreams were different. Not of drowning or abandonment, but of doorways. Dylan, or was it Matthew, standing in doorways, neither entering nor leaving, just waiting on thresholds she couldn't quite bring herself to cross. The next morning, for the first time in over a decade, Elaine didn't go to the beach at dawn. Instead, she made coffee, sat on her small balcony, and watched the city wake up around her. From her third-floor apartment, she could just make out a sliver of ocean on the horizon. It seemed less accusatory today, less laden with painful meaning. She spent the day alternating between Dylan's journal and the clippings he had collected. The journal was sporadic, sometimes with daily entries, sometimes with gaps of months. The early years were dark, paranoid, filled with fear and regret. He wrote about moving from port to port, working for cash on fishing boats, sleeping in hostels or sometimes on beaches. always looking over his shoulder, always using different names. The entries changed around the 5-year mark, became more settled, less frantic. This was when Sophia entered his life. Sophia, who had helped him become Matthew Sanders, who had offered him a chance at stability. "Sophia knows I'm running from something," one entry read. "She thinks it's an abusive family. I let her believe that because it's easier than the truth. Sometimes I almost believe it myself, that I had no choice but to escape. But then I dream of Mom on that beach, and I know the lie for what it is." The woman had clearly been his lifeline. The photos showed a progression. Dylan or Matthew looking progressively healthier, more at ease, more present. Sophia had given him a foundation, and Lucas, her nephew, had given him a purpose. There were entries about teaching the boy to fish, to swim, to identify different types of boats. "Lucas asked about my family today," read an entry from 7 years after his disappearance. "Asked if I had a mom and dad like he has Sophia. I told him yes, but that they live very far away. Do you miss them?" he wanted to know. I said yes, every day. "Then why don't you visit them?" The questions of children are the hardest to answer. Elaine closed the journal again, tears blurring her vision. The Dylan who wrote these words wasn't the selfish boy who had fled his troubles. He was a young man haunted by his choices, trying to build something from the wreckage of his old life. Still wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong in his actions, but not the callous monster she had briefly imagined upon learning the truth. The clippings told another story. Dylan had tracked her life with obsessive detail, news mentions of memorial services, community awards she had received for volunteer work, even mundane items like the photo of her book club in the local paper when they raised money for the library. He had assembled a collage of her public life over the decade of separation. By evening, Elaine was emotionally exhausted, but clearer in her thoughts. The anger remained. How could it not? But it had softened somewhat, complexified by these glimpses into Dylan's parallel journey. He had suffered too, albeit by choice rather than by fate. He had built a life and lost important parts of it. He had carried the weight of his deception through the years, just as she had carried the weight of her grief. 2 days remained before Dylan's scheduled departure, 2 days to decide what came next. Elaine sat at her kitchen table and made a list, pro and con, like she used to do when facing difficult decisions in her teaching career. Reasons to maintain contact. He was her son, blood, the only child she would ever have. There had been genuine remorse in his words and actions. The dangerous situation that had prompted his disappearance was resolved. Reasons to cut ties, the magnitude of his deception, the years of unnecessary pain, the complexity of maintaining the secret moving forward, the fundamental breach of trust. The list seemed inadequate to the enormity of the choice before her. This wasn't like deciding whether to accept a new job or move to a new city. This was deciding whether to resurrect a relationship that had been buried, literally, for a decade. Whether to forge a connection with a person who both was and wasn't the son she had raised. Elaine slept on the decision, hoping for clarity in the morning. When dawn came, she found herself driving to Crescent Bay, almost on autopilot. But instead of stopping at her usual spot, she continued to North Point, where Dylan had revealed himself days earlier. The beach was empty at this hour. Elaine stood at the water's edge, watching the waves crash against the rocky outcropping. For 10 years she had talked to these waves, imagining Dylan somewhere beneath them. Now she knew better. He had been above them all this time, sailing on their surface, carried to distant shores. What would she say to the ocean now? What ritual could replace the one that had structured her mornings for a decade? As she stood there, her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text message from an unfamiliar number, but she knew immediately who it was from. "Saw your car at the beach. I'm at the coffee shop on Ocean Drive if you want to talk." He was watching her again, still tracking her movements. Elaine's first instinct was anger at the intrusion, but then she reconsidered. He wasn't hiding this time, wasn't observing from shadows. He was announcing his presence, offering a choice rather than imposing his observation. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. Elaine texted back. 20 minutes. The coffee shop was just opening when she arrived. Dylan, or Matthew, she still struggled with what to call him, sat at a corner table, 2 cups already in front of him. He stood when he saw her, the gesture oddly formal. "I got you coffee," he said as she sat. "Black with 1 sugar. You still take it that way?" "Yes." The fact that he remembered such a detail after all these years was both touching and disconcerting. "How did you know I'd be at the beach?" "Educated guess. You've gone almost every morning for 10 years. You've been watching me that long?" He shook his head. "Not consistently, when I could, from a distance, news articles, social media, friends of friends." He looked down at his coffee. "I sound like a stalker. I'm sorry." "You are a stalker," Elaine pointed out, but without heat. "But I understand why, partly." They sat in silence for a moment, the awkwardness between them almost palpable. "I read your journal," Elaine said finally. "Some of it, and looked through the clippings." Dylan nodded, waiting for her to continue. "You've lived a whole life I know nothing about," she said. "Matthew Sanders has no connection to me. The things that shaped him, the people, the places, the experiences, I wasn't part of any of it." "No," he agreed softly. "You weren't. So where does that leave us? I'm the mother of Dylan Hayes, who legally doesn't exist anymore. You're Matthew Sanders, who legally has no mother. The gap seems unbridgeable." Dylan was quiet for a moment, considering. "When I was sailing through the Caribbean, there was this phenomenon I'd sometimes see. Two distinct bodies of water meeting, different colors, different temperatures, different salinities, but still part of the same ocean. You could draw a line on the surface where they met." "Poetic," Elaine said, "but I'm not sure how it applies. I'm saying maybe we don't try to bridge the gap. Maybe we just acknowledge it exists and find ways to exist on either side of it." He leaned forward slightly. "Matthew Sanders can know Elaine Hayes, can call her occasionally, can visit sometimes. The history between them can be complicated without being explained to others. It was a compromise, not the restoration of a mother-son relationship as it had been, but the creation of something new, something that acknowledged both the connection and the unbridgeable decade between them." "And Robert," Elaine asked, "your father deserves to know you're alive." Dylan's expression tightened. "Dad has moved on, has a new wife, a new life. The truth would only disrupt that." "That's not your decision to make," Elaine countered. "You made that choice for me for 10 years. I won't help you make it for him. Are you going to tell him?" It was the central question, wasn't it? The one she had been avoiding since their first meeting on the beach. "I don't know," she admitted. "I need more time to decide, but I won't lie to him if he asks me directly. I've had enough deception for one lifetime." Dylan nodded slowly, accepting this condition. "Fair enough," he hesitated. "And us? Do we try to have some kind of relationship moving forward?" Elaine looked at her son, the boy she had raised now hidden beneath the man he had become. The decision crystallized, not in a sudden epiphany, but in the quiet recognition of what she had known all along. "Yes," she said simply. "We try. I don't know what it will look like. I don't know if it will work. There are conditions, boundaries, we'll need to establish. But yes, we try." The relief that washed over Dylan's face was so profound, it momentarily transformed him back into the boy she remembered. Vulnerable, transparent, grateful. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't deserve a second chance." "No," Elaine agreed. "You don't. But I'm giving one to both of us anyway." She took a sip of her coffee. "When do you have to leave for Florida?" "Tomorrow afternoon. The charter starts next week, but I need a few days to prepare the boat." Elaine nodded. "Then we have today and tomorrow morning. Let's use it to start figuring out what this new relationship looks like." They spent the day together, not as mother and son exactly, but as two people with a complicated shared history trying to find connection points. Dylan showed her photos of the boats he had worked on, the places he had lived, told her stories about life on the water, answered her questions about the past decade with a candor that hadn't been possible in their earlier meetings. Elaine found herself laughing occasionally at his adventures, marveling at the skills he had developed, the resilience he had shown despite the terrible mistake at the foundation of his new life. The boy she had raised, bright, resourceful, determined, was still visible in the man across from her. Matthew Sanders wasn't a complete stranger after all. They went to dinner at a small restaurant far from Crescent Bay, where no one would recognize Elaine as the grieving beach mother. Over pasta and wine, they tentatively discussed the future. "I'll call every Sunday," Dylan promised, "and maybe visit when I'm between charters." "I'd like that," Elaine said. "And maybe someday I could come see where you live. Meet your friends. The people who know you as Matthew," she didn't add. "I'd like that too," They were building something fragile, a bridge across impossible distance. Neither of them mentioned Robert again. That decision, whether to bring him into this tenuous new reality, remained suspended between them. The next morning, Elaine drove Dylan to the airport. The goodbye was awkward. Not quite a mother seeing off a son, not quite friends parting. They settled for a brief hug that held decades of loss within its boundaries. "I'll call when I land," Dylan said. Elaine nodded. "Be safe." She watched him walk through security, this man who both was and wasn't her son. He turned once to wave before disappearing around a corner. Driving home, Elaine felt a strange mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. Grief, still but transformed. Relief, but tempered with uncertainty. A tentative hope for what might grow from the ashes of what had been destroyed. At home, she found herself opening Instagram again. Ocean dweller Dylan had accepted her follow request. His private world was now visible to her, the posts going back 2 years documenting his life on boats, on beaches, under endless skies. The most recent post was from that morning, the view from her apartment balcony, showing that sliver of ocean on the horizon. The caption read simply, "Bridges, not walls." Elaine studied the image, recognizing the message for what it was, an acknowledgement of the gap between them, a commitment to finding connection despite it. She closed the app and looked at her watch. Nearly dawn. For the first time in over a decade, she had no desire to drive to Crescent Bay, to sit on the sand, to talk to waves that had never held her son. Instead, she went to her balcony, coffee in hand, and watched that distant sliver of ocean as the sun rose. The water caught the light, shimmering gold against the blue. Not a grave anymore. Just water, connecting distant shores. Il nunca quis voltar. But perhaps in his way he had. 14 years after Dylan Hayes vanished into the Pacific, leaving his mother to mourn a death that never happened, something new had begun. Not forgiveness exactly. Not reconciliation in any simple sense. But a bridge, tentative and fragile, spanning the waters of deception and grief that had separated them for so long. Elaine sipped her coffee and watched the light change on the distant water. She didn't know what would come next. Whether she would tell Robert the truth, whether this fragile connection with the man her son had become would strengthen or dissolve over time, whether the anger that still simmered beneath her tentative acceptance would eventually cool or ignite again. 2 weeks passed. Dylan called as promised each Sunday evening. Their conversations were stilted at first, navigating the unfamiliar territory between them. He told her about preparing the boat for the charter. She told him about her book club and volunteer work. They carefully avoided the decade-shaped void between them, focusing instead on building something new from the edges inward. The third Sunday, Dylan didn't call. Elaine waited by the phone, anxiety mounting as minutes stretched into hours. By midnight, the old fears had resurfaced, that he had disappeared again, that this brief reconnection had been another cruel deception. She tried his number. Straight to voicemail. Checked his Instagram. No new posts since the previous week. The familiar panic of loss rose in her throat. Monday morning brought a text message. "Sorry about yesterday. Lost cell service in a storm. Calling tonight." The relief was disproportionate to the situation. A missed call, nothing more. But it revealed how fragile her trust still was, how ready she was to believe he had vanished again. That evening, when he called, she heard the exhaustion in his voice. "The storm came out of nowhere. We had to change course, ended up in a small cove with no signal. The family I'm taking to the Bahamas was pretty scared. Are you safe now?" The maternal concern in her voice surprised them both. "Yeah, we're docked in Nassau. Weather's cleared. Should be smooth sailing from here." There was a new dimension to their conversation that night. Genuine concern, emotional investment. A crack in the careful distance they had maintained. The next Sunday he sent photos. Blue water, white sand. Himself at the helm of his boat. The Nomad, he called it. Elaine found herself studying his images with the hunger of lost time, noting the laugh lines around his eyes, the confidence in his stance, the ease with which he handled the complex equipment of a sailboat. She sent a photo back, her living room, recently redecorated. She had removed the shadow boxes and memorial items, replacing them with new art, new plants. Moving forward, the image implied, without erasing the past. A month into their tentative reconnection, Dylan asked the question that had been suspended between them. "Have you told Dad?" Elaine had been expecting it, had rehearsed her answer. "No, not yet. Will you?" "I'm still deciding." she said honestly. He's happy, Dylan. Remarried. Settled. The truth would upend everything for him. Like it did for you, Dylan acknowledged quietly. Yes, and I'm still processing that upending. They left it there, unresolved. A decision for another day. 6 weeks after Dylan's departure, Elaine received a small package in the mail. Inside was a seashell, not the lightning whelk from his collection, but a new one. A delicate spiral in pale pink and cream. With it, a note. Starting a new collection. Thought you might want the first one. The gesture touched her deeply. A symbolic, fresh start. Her connection to the boy who had collected treasures from the sea, and the man who still found beauty in the waters that had supposedly claimed him. 2 months in, Elaine found herself facing a decision she hadn't anticipated. Her sister Maggie's 60th birthday was approaching, a milestone Maggie intended to celebrate with a family gathering. Robert would be there with his wife Carol, cousins, nieces, nephews. The inevitable questions about how Elaine was doing, the pitying looks, the careful avoidance of mentioning Dylan directly. How could she sit through it now? How could she accept condolences and concerned inquiries when she knew her son was alive, sailing in the Caribbean? How could she look Robert in the eye and maintain the deception? When she mentioned the dilemma to Dylan during their Sunday call, his response was immediate. Don't go. Say you're sick. I can't miss Maggie's 60th, Elaine protested. She's been my rock through everything. Then tell her the truth, Dylan suggested. Just her. She could help you navigate the party. No, Elaine's refusal was firm. I'm not ready to share this with anyone yet, not even Maggie. Then I don't know what to tell you, Mom. It's an impossible situation. One you created, she reminded him, the simmering anger surfacing briefly. Dylan was silent for a long moment. Yes, he finally acknowledged. One I created. The party loomed 2 weeks away. Elaine vacillated between excuses to avoid it and strategies to endure it. In the end, a different solution presented itself. Robert called, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Elaine, I'm not going to be at Maggie's party. Why not? Is everything okay with you and Carol? Yes, we're fine. It's just... He hesitated. I had a dream about Dylan. A bad one. It stirred everything up again. I don't think I can handle a family gathering right now. Elaine's grip on the phone tightened. The irony was almost unbearable. I understand, she managed. I have difficult days too. Do you still? After all this time? There was genuine curiosity in Robert's question. Different, she told him. The pain changes shape. Some days it's a boulder crushing you. Other days it's just a stone in your shoe, but it never leaves. She was quoting Janice from the support group, realizing as she spoke how true the words remained. Even now that she knew Dylan was alive. That's exactly it, Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. Some days I can almost forget, and then something triggers it all over again. A song he liked on the radio. A kid who looks like him on the street. Guilt twisted in Elaine's stomach. Here was her chance to tell him, to end his suffering as hers had been ended, to give him the truth he deserved. Robert, she began, then faltered. I still have those moments too. Cowardice or kindness. She wasn't sure which. Anyway, Robert continued, oblivious to her internal struggle, I told Maggie I can't make it. Send her my love, will you? Of course. After they hung up, Elaine sat with her hands shaking. The decision to maintain Dylan's secret grew heavier by the day. She wasn't sure how long she could carry it. Maggie's party went smoothly without Robert's presence. One less person to lie to, one less opportunity for the truth to slip out in an unguarded moment. Elaine played her role well, the recovered, grieving mother, finding joy again despite her loss. Only she knew the hollow center of that performance. 3 months after Dylan's reappearance, he proposed a visit. I have a 2-week break between charters, he explained. I could come to San Diego, or we could meet somewhere else if that's easier. Easier? As if anything about this situation could be easy. San Diego is fine, Elaine decided. We can't avoid this place forever. I'll stay in a hotel, he offered. Yes, she wasn't ready for more. The brief visits were one thing. Having him sleep under her roof, reclaiming space in her daily life, that was a step she couldn't yet take. Dylan arrived on a Tuesday, renting a car at the airport rather than asking Elaine to pick him up. Another small courtesy, another acknowledgement of the boundaries between them. They met for dinner at a restaurant downtown, far from familiar haunts. Seeing him again was jarring. In person, the changes time had wrought were more evident than in photos or video calls. He moved differently, more assurance in his gait, more weathering in his features. Caribbean sun had darkened his skin, lightened his hair. He looked healthy, vibrant, a stark contrast to the memory of the pale, anxious 19-year-old who had disappeared. "You look well," Elaine observed as they were seated. "So do you," he returned. "Different from when I saw you in April." "Different how?" he considered before answering. "Less haunted." It was true, she realized. The burden of grief had lifted, replaced by more complex emotions, but less crushing in their weight. She slept better, laughed more easily, had started painting again, a hobby abandoned after his disappearance. Over dinner, they discussed his visit, places to go that wouldn't trigger painful memories or risk uncomfortable encounters, activities that would allow them to build new connections rather than revisit old wounds. "I thought maybe a day trip to Julian," Elaine suggested. "We never went there when you were growing up." "Sounds perfect," Dylan agreed. "And maybe the new aquarium? I read about it online." They were creating an itinerary for strangers getting to know each other, not a mother and son reuniting. Perhaps that was exactly what they needed. The next day, they drove to Julian, a small mountain town known for apple orchards and pie shops. Neutral territory. No memories of family trips, no risk of running into old acquaintances. As they walked the main street, looking in shop windows, Elaine was struck by how normal it felt. Just a middle-aged woman and a younger man enjoying a day trip. To observers, they could be anything. Colleagues, friends, even a May-December romance. No one would guess at the tangled history between them. Over apple pie at a rustic cafe, Dylan asked about her life during their separation. Not the public record he had followed from afar, but the private experiences. Her divorce from Robert, her career change, her brief attempts at dating that had never led anywhere meaningful. Elaine found herself opening up more than she had in their calls. Perhaps it was the distance from San Diego, from the scene of their shared tragedy. Perhaps it was simply time doing its work, softening the jagged edges of betrayal. "I was angry at you for so long," she admitted. "Even when I thought you were dead, I was angry that you went swimming that day, that you took that risk, that you left me." Dylan nodded, accepting this. "You had every right to be, and now I'm angry for different reasons," she continued. "But also, I look at you and I see glimpses of the life you've built, the man you've become, and I can't help being proud of that man, even while I'm furious with the boy who caused so much pain." It was the most honest she had been about her conflicted feelings. Dylan seemed to understand the significance of her admission. "I don't deserve your pride," he said quietly, "but thank you for it anyway." They drove back to San Diego in companionable silence, the day trip having shifted something subtle between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a step toward understanding. The week continued in similar fashion, small excursions to places without loaded memories. The aquarium, a hiking trail in the hills, a concert in the park. Gradually, Elaine found herself relaxing in Dylan's company, seeing him as he was now, rather than through the lens of his deception. He told her stories of his life at sea, the storms he had weathered, the exotic ports he had visited, the wealthy clients whose vacations he facilitated with his charter business, the quiet nights under star-filled skies, alone with his thoughts and the endless water. "Do you ever get tired of it?" Elaine asked. "The constant movement? Never having a fixed address?" Dylan considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, when I was with Sophia, I thought about settling somewhere, buying land, building something permanent." He shrugged. "But after she left, the movement felt safer again, familiar. And now?" He looked at her directly. "Now I'm reconsidering. Again." The implication hung between them. Their reconnection was changing his outlook, making him reconsider the nomadic existence he had embraced as Matthew Sanders. On the 5th day of his visit, they ventured closer to dangerous emotional territory. Dylan wanted to see the ocean, not surprising for a man who had made his living on the water for a decade. "Not Crescent Bay," Elaine stipulated immediately. "I can't go there with you. Not yet." "Understood. There are other beaches." They went to La Jolla Cove instead, sat on a bench overlooking the sea, watched seals sunning themselves on the rocks below. The ocean here was benign, playful even, nothing like the threatening presence it held in their shared history. "Do you still love it?" Elaine asked, nodding toward the water. "After everything?" Dylan's smile was wry. "Ironic, isn't it? The ocean supposedly killed me, and then became my life. He gazed out at the horizon. Yes, I still love it. More now than before, actually. I understand it better, respect it more. They watched the waves in silence for a while. Then Dylan spoke again, his voice soft but clear. I need to tell you something. Something I've been working towards saying since I came back into your life. Elaine tensed, bracing herself for another revelation. What is it? I'm sorry. The words were simple, but delivered with such raw emotion that Elaine's breath caught. Not the casual sorry I've said before. I mean, I am deeply, profoundly sorry for what I did to you, for the pain I caused, for the years I stole from both of us. There's no excuse, no justification that can make it right. I know that. Tears filled his eyes, but he continued. I was a coward, a selfish, frightened child who made a catastrophic decision and then compounded it year after year. I watched you suffer and did nothing. I can never undo that, never make it right. Elaine remained silent, letting him continue. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that not a day has passed when I haven't regretted what I did to you, when I haven't carried the weight of it. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the second chance you've given me, knowing I can never fully earn it. The words washed over Elaine like the waves below them. Powerful, inescapable, transformative. This wasn't the defensive explanation of their first meetings or the careful contrition of their early calls. This was full acknowledgement, complete acceptance of responsibility. Thank you for saying that, she said finally. I needed to hear it. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was recognition of a threshold crossed, of genuine remorse met with genuine acknowledgement. They sat together a while longer, watching the ocean that had both separated and connected them. When they finally left, Elaine felt lighter somehow, as if naming the full weight of Dylan's actions had paradoxically made that weight easier to carry. The remainder of Dylan's visit passed quickly. Each day brought them closer to a new equilibrium, not the mother-son relationship they had lost, but something different. A friendship built on the ruins of family bonds, scaffolded by shared history, but oriented toward an uncertain future. On his last evening in San Diego, they had dinner at Elaine's apartment, a home-cooked meal, the first she had prepared for him in over a decade. The domesticity of it was both comforting and strange. As they cleared the dishes together, Dylan broached the subject they had carefully avoided all week. Have you decided? About telling Dad? Elaine placed a plate in the dishwasher before answering. Yes. I'm not going to tell him. Not now. Maybe not ever. Dylan's relief was palpable. Thank you. Don't thank me, she said sharply. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for him. She turned to face her son directly. Robert has rebuilt his life, found happiness with Carol. The truth would destroy that for him, force him to relive the grief and anger I've been working through these past months. I understand, Dylan said quietly. But, Elaine continued, if he ever asks me directly, if he ever suspects something and questions me, I won't lie to him. Are we clear on that? Crystal clear. Good. She closed the dishwasher with finality. Now let's have coffee on the balcony. They sat watching the lights of the city, the distant gleam of the ocean just visible on the horizon. Their conversation turned to the future, Dylan's upcoming charters, Elaine's plans to take a painting class, the possibility of her visiting him in Florida later in the year. I've been thinking, Dylan said during a lull, about making changes to my life, my business. What kind of changes? I might base myself more permanently in one place, maybe the Florida Keys or the Virgin Islands. Buy property instead of just living on the boat. Because of this? Elaine gestured between them. Our reconnection. Dylan nodded, partly, and partly because I'm 30 now. The constant movement made sense when I was running. It makes less sense now. And you're not running anymore? Elaine observed. No. Not from the drug dealers, not from the past, not from you. He smiled slightly. It's terrifying and liberating at the same time. Elaine understood that feeling well. Her own life had been a form of stasis, trapped in grief, in ritual, in the amber of Dylan's memory. Now she too was moving forward, terrified and liberated by the truth. The next morning, she drove him to the airport. Their goodbye was different from the previous one. Less awkward, more natural. A hug that acknowledged connection rather than emphasizing distance. I'll call Sunday, Dylan promised. I'll answer, Elaine returned. She watched him walk into the terminal, this strange, familiar stranger who was her son. Not the boy she had raised or the young man who had fled, but the adult who had returned bearing truth and remorse. The bridge between them was still fragile, still swaying in uncertain winds, but it grew stronger with each exchange, each shared meal, each honest conversation. Driving home, Elaine found herself turning toward Crescent Bay for the first time since Dylan's reappearance. She parked in the familiar lot, walked to her usual spot on the sand. The place looked different somehow, smaller, less significant, stripped of its power as both shrine and accusation. She sat watching the waves, not in mourning now, but in contemplation. The ocean hadn't taken her son after all. It had merely carried him away and in its own time carried a version of him back. "Goodbye," she said aloud to the water, to the decade of grief, to the daily ritual that had both sustained and confined her. "Thank you for giving him back." Then she stood, brushed the sand from her clothes, and walked away from Crescent Bay for what she knew would be the last time. 6 months after Dylan's reappearance, Elaine boarded a flight to Miami. He met her at the airport, tanned and smiling, no longer the apparition from the beach, but a steady presence in her redefined life. They had spoken weekly, exchanged texts and photos, built a foundation for whatever came next. He drove her to a small island in the Keys, where he had recently purchased a cottage near the marina, where his boat was docked. Home base, he called it. The first permanent address Matthew Sanders had ever claimed. The cottage was simple but charming. 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, a small garden already planted with tropical flowers. On the walls hung photographs of places he had sailed, people he had met. A life documented, no longer hidden. In the guest room, freshly painted for her visit, a shadow box displayed seashells, the beginning of a new collection. Among them, the lightning whelk from Galveston that had once revealed his existence to her. No longer a secret signal, but an acknowledged memory, integrated into his present life. "What do you think?" Dylan asked as he showed her around, a hint of nervousness in his voice. Elaine looked at her son, the stranger who had become familiar again, the ghost made flesh, the boy, now fully man, and felt a peace she had not known in 14 years settle over her. "I think it's a good place to start again," she said. Outside, the ocean stretched to the horizon, no longer a barrier between them, but a connection, the same waters touching both their shores. Elaine Hayes had lost her son to those waters 14 years ago. Now, against all odds, against all reason, they had given him back, not unchanged, not unscathed, but alive, present, real. The story that had begun with a disappearance and a decade of grief had transformed into something else entirely. Not a happy ending, there was too much loss, too much damage for that, but perhaps a hopeful beginning, a second chance neither of them deserved, but both had somehow been granted. On the beach that evening, watching the sunset together, Elaine finally spoke the words that had been forming in her heart over the months since Dylan's return. "I forgive you," she said simply. Dylan turned to her, eyes wide with surprise and sudden tears. "You don't have to." "I know," she acknowledged. "I'm not doing it for you, I'm doing it for me. Because carrying anger and grief for 14 years was enough. Because whatever comes next, I want to face it without that weight." He nodded, understanding. "Thank you," he whispered. They sat in silence as darkness fell, the forgiveness between them neither erasing the past nor simplifying the future, but offering a clearer path forward. The ocean before them whispered its endless secrets, among them the truth of Dylan Hayes' disappearance and Matthew Sanders' birth, a truth no longer hidden but now shared between mother and son, binding them in its complexity. Eritard demise for the lost decade, for the pain inflicted, for the simpler relationship they might have had. But it wasn't too late for this imperfect reconciliation, this careful rebuilding, this bridge across impossible waters. The tide came in as stars appeared above them, waves erasing their footprints on the sand. Tomorrow would write new ones, different ones, chosen with awareness of all that had come before. "Ready to head back?" Dylan asked as the evening chill settled around them. Elaine nodded, rising to her feet. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." Together, they turned away from the ocean and walked toward home.